Prologue, an ominous presence. Feldway fled back to the heavens. His body aches after being turned to dust by Diablo, but he feels relieved now that he has come this far. There are still no signs of recovery, but he should be able to heal with time. The key is to buy time. Only a limited number of people can jump directly to Heaven Star Princess. Palace. With Iverage in the lower world, it was nearly impossible to break through Tensukaku. Feldway had hoped to rest up here and make a comeback. Diablo's strength was unexpected, but I'll win next time. Feldway was confident he could win. He learned Diablo's fighting tactics, and after watching Yuuki's fighting style, he was able to incorporate teleportation into his battles. No matter how strong Diablo is, he is no match for Feldway. However, there are still some uncertainties. This is Demon Lord Rimuru. That terrifying slime had even returned from the other side of the end of space. Time. It was an unbelievable event. This means that time-space leap shockwave chronozaltation no longer works on Rimuru. It would have been better if we had perished at the end of time and space. Muttering this, Feldway walked along the ruined road, heading towards the throne. However, there was an unexpected customer there. Yo, you got beaten up pretty badly. Sitting lazily on the throne was Dino, who was supposed to be conquering Ramirez's labyrinth. Pico and Gracia are also there. Everyone was relaxing, in chairs separate from the throne where Dino was sitting. If all three of them had returned, it could be that they had fled after conquering the labyrinth, or perhaps it seems Vega lost. Is that why he ran away? When Feldway asked that, Dino shrugged. Look, there's no point in running away or anything. It's impossible. Even Xeranis, the insect, bug, demon Maw King, was defeated by Zijin. It was a shocking report. Although he had heard of Vega's defeat, he believed that Xeranis was still alive. And well, Feldway gritted his teeth, realizing that this was an overly optimistic understanding. Diablo. That's not true. I just said that Zijin defeated him. Just as I thought it was possible for Diablo, he emphasized that it was Zijin who defeated Xeranis. There were many strong people under Rimuru who needed to be wary of, but it seemed that they were a greater threat than Feldway had anticipated. So that means you were defeated by Diablo. Ha ha ha, how funny. Now you understand just how dangerous he is, don't you? That's right, he's seriously dangerous. Zijin was also traumatized. To be honest, I don't know which one is worse. Diablo and Zijin. Rimuru is in charge of it all. This was an enemy that had to be defeated in order for Feldway to achieve his ambitions. There are still many other obstacles, with Milim at the forefront. Where did I go wrong? I'll have to rethink my strategy depending on how much of a rampage Evalage will cause. Dino spoke to Feldway, who was lost in thought. More importantly. And then, Dino's mood changed. His usual nonchalant, calm and collected attitude had become as sharp as a sharpened blade. At this point, Feldway suddenly began to notice something strange, but Dino's question distracted him. The holy relics that were carefully kept here have disappeared. Do you know anything about it? That's what Dino asked. What? That can't be true, Feldway thought. Feldway turns his back on the throne and begins to walk away. Beyond, that is a door leading to the basement where the Sayando is located. It boasts strength comparable to that of the Tensukaku and serves the role of blocking intruders. However, it had been smashed to pieces, leaving the stairs completely visible. The saint's remains are enshrined in the Sayando. It was something that should never have happened, leaving it so defenseless. After all, the holy remains were those of stellar King Dragon Veldanava and his beloved wife, Princess Lucia. Dino found it and placed it in the Ark of the Covenant, keeping it safe and secure. but it was a highly confidential matter that only a very few people knew about. By the way, the Ark of the Covenant is a coffin of Holy Spirit power and ice. It is an object equal to or greater than the one Ruminas used to seal Cronoa, and it was impossible for anyone who belonged to the demons to destroy it, or so it should have been. This place is safer than anywhere else in the world. That is an undeniable fact. That is why Feldway also kept his true form here. After all, Feldway helped create this place, taking extra precautions to ensure its safety. And yet, the door to the Siando was destroyed. Ivalage. Feldway asked without turning around to face Dino and the others who were following behind him. I can't think of anything else. Dino declared in a blatant manner. That's your fault, Feldway. If you hadn't removed the protection of the heavens, the stars, the palace, the sacred remains of the two people would never have been stolen. Just as Dino had pointed out, the Heaven Star Palace Palaskayu had been greatly vandalized. Even facilities that were difficult to destroy had been destroyed to the max. Naturally, Feldway had noticed as well, but he dismissed it as a minor matter. He intended to think about reviving the Heaven, Star Palace, and Palace after the base world was destroyed. However, the loss of the holy relics was an issue that could not be ignored. It was still permissible that Veldanava would lose the body he was meant to inhabit when he was revived. This was because a true dragon was an immortal being and could be revived even from nothing. However, the holy remains of Veldanava's beloved wife, Lucia, can never be recreated again. I won't be able to face Veldanava-sama when he is resurrected. That's what Feldway thought to himself, believing that he had been abandoned by Veldanava and harboring deep-rooted resentment. Feldway had come to the extreme conclusion of destroying everything, but deep in his heart, he still longed for his master. Feldway's misfortune was that he didn't want to admit it to himself. Feldway sees the Ark of the Covenant, destroyed and in a pitiful state. Shit. Dino's story was true. It was no longer a place to pray for peace of mind. Damn Ivalage, you're doing whatever you want. No, that's not right. Dino wondered whether he should say anything. However, he thought it would be troublesome if he were to be refuted, so he kept his mouth shut. Instead, prioritize the things that need to be confirmed. Just to be clear, this place was safe until you took up residence in the main body. Right. What? No, this was a place that only you or Velzard-sama could enter, and even we couldn't just come and go as we pleased, so I wondered if it was really okay to assume that it was Ivalage's doing. What do you mean? Dino's words, which were unusually serious, had a hidden meaning. This concerns Feldway, and he gives it serious thought. Only he or Velzard could open the door leading to the Holy Hall. That's why he hadn't expected this place to be ransacked. Maybe you forgot to lock the door. Destroying a door is difficult, but if it's unlocked, it's a different story. The sacred protection won't work, so the strength will be reduced to a level that even Dean and his friends can break it. Don't be stupid. That's right, I also think that's not the case. Well, Dino would understand, but there's no way Feldway would make such a mistake. Gracia pointed this out sharply, but she gave in easily. Even Pico and Gracia couldn't believe that Feldway would make such a foolish mistake. Hey. Dino was the only one who seemed dissatisfied. However, Dino tried his best to return his expression to a serious one and spoke his next words. So, what is the possibility that Veldanava-sama has been revived? The reason Dino pointed out this possibility was because of the incident with the door. The door was thought to be impossible to destroy from the outside, but its structure made it vulnerable to impacts from the inside. This was because the protection only worked from the outside. Dino saw the traces of destruction on the door and thought it seemed like it had been blown off from the inside. Of course, it's possible that Evil Age broke the lock and entered, and then his power went out of control when he left. No, if he absorbed the holy relics inside, that's the more likely possibility. But still, no matter what, Dino could not deny the possibility of Veldenova's revival. This is by no means something to be happy about. There are still questions about the timing of the revival. From Dino's perspective, it was a guess he hoped would be wrong. If Veldenova really has been resurrected, why now? Did Feldway wake up to the threat of the world's destruction, as he had hoped? I wish that were the case, but I don't think that's the case. Dino doesn't understand anything. That's why it's so scary. Maybe I was overthinking it, but Dino's bad premonitions were highly accurate. 99 times more accurate than his good premonitions. That's why he voiced his theory. Hopping Feldway would deny it. What are you saying? Well, this is just a possibility, but if the two of them were still stored when you returned to your main body, then they would have disappeared after that. That would be before the time when Evil Age's forces invaded Heaven Star Star. Palace. What if they were revived during that time and returned to the base world? Feldway examines the possibilities Dino mentioned. From the time Feldway returns to his main body until the invasion of the cryptids begins, there isn't as much time as one might think. The idea that Veldenova had been resurrected was an extremely absurd theory. If that is true, then the question becomes why they don't make it public. Feldway, who was manipulating Milim, should be a target for Veldenova's purge, even if his power wasn't at its best. No, is it possible that this is why he didn't show himself? Surely that couldn't be the case with Veldenova-sama. No way, Feldway concluded. That's impossible. Right. It's a good thing for Dino and a disappointment for Feldway, but it's a conclusion they both agree on. However, troublesome problems still remained. This is not just a possibility, but it looks like it will become a reality. Pico and Gracia pointed this out. That means... that's right. It's almost certain that Evil Age ate Lord Veldenova's holy remains. Dino nodded at this. That's right. There's a possibility that the already troublesome Destruct World Dragon, Iverage has absorbed Veldenova. Sama's power as well. Not just Veldenova's power, but Lucia's too. Dino understood the level of threat, so he didn't feel any eeriness. It was definitely dangerous, but he could think optimistically that it wasn't up to him to deal with it. That's why I can easily say, that's bad, and just leave it to Feldway. That possibility was one that Feldway could not ignore. For the purpose of destroying the world, it would be better if Evil Age went on a rampage. However, if he were to become an evil god that could not be controlled, it would be a major problem for Feldway, who is plotting to rebuild the world. What are you going to do? Since it was something that didn't concern Dino, he asked the question with the intention of hearing about the policy. This irritated Feldway, but at this point, he finally realized that he no longer had any control over Dino. Have you escaped from my influence? Now. Don't make fun of me. Just to let you know, it's not just me, but Pico and Gracia too. I've had a hard time up until now, but I guess I don't need to listen to your orders anymore. That's it, we're free. Feldway thought with disgust. This was because he understood that even if he asked why he had escaped the authority of control, he would not want to answer. In the first place, it was precisely because they were originally selfish guys that he had forced them to be under his command. If that influence was no longer there, it would be difficult to keep Dino and the others under his command. Are you going to betray me? Feldway had no right to complain. Dino and the others were angry too. Hey, wait a second. It was you who betrayed our trust. That's right. Free will should be respected, but it was you who made us work so hard without asking permission. That's right. We have no intention of betraying you, but we just can't walk the same path. Each of them responded as they pleased and declared their separation. The reason Dino came here was because he had heard that the destruction Death World Dragon Ryu, Ivarage had appeared in the Tensukkaku, and he was curious as to whether the Heaven Star Palace was safe. As feared, the holy relics had been stolen. It would have been good if we could have prevented it before it happened, but since we were too late, there's no point in regretting it. All that remains is to accept that this is no longer a problem they can handle. So, meeting Feldway here was just a coincidence, and I was able to take the opportunity to complain, so I felt surprisingly relieved. So, as if they no longer had any business with Feldway, they began chatting amongst themselves. It seems Rimuru-san has returned, so Ramirez will hire me again, right? That's impossible. You're always slacking off. No. Bistur-san needs me too. He promised to talk to me if he was ever in trouble. He's a nice guy. Aren't you the only one who's cheating? Don't worry, I'll introduce you guys too. You should be grateful, Dino said arrogantly. Although they complained, Pico and Gracia followed Dino's orders. There was certainly an invisible bond there. So, do as you like from now on, Feldway. Dino said, as if he had just remembered something. When Feldway heard that, he thought, what a joke. Don't say what you want. Do you have no just cause? Moreover, have you even forgotten your pride as a primordial being, to respect a mere slime that has only just been born? I was so enraged that I shouted without thinking. However, Dino replied nonchalantly. No matter how many years you live in vain, it's meaningless. The important thing is how you live, right? It's the strength of your will that makes your soul shine. Dino explained his theory and looked at Feldway with pity. Then, his expression became serious again, and he gave him a warning. Your eyes are clouded right now. Remember your original intentions once again. That was Dino's way of showing kindness. Having said what he needed to say, Dino turned his back. Pico and Gracia followed suit. Please stop doing nonsensical things like destroying the world. Bye, Feldway. I never hated you. The three of them said whatever they wanted, and then left. Feldway was left behind, and just stood there in a daze. It's too late now. There's no way we can cancel the plan now. I muttered this even though there was no one around. Feldway was empty now. I also lost a friend. I also lost my friends. And there is no Lord. The plan has failed, and now it's up to Ivarage, the destruction death world. Dragon Ryu. However, the question remained as to whether this was really the right thing to do. It seems that Ivarage has even eaten Feldway's memories. Since the cause of the situation was my own, I had no right to complain. However, I felt that it would be wrong to leave it alone. As Dino said, it is unlikely that Veldanava has been revived. Therefore, the conclusion is that Ivarage must have eaten him. What was Dino worried about in the first place? If Lord Veldanava has been resurrected, then my goal has been achieved. I am happy about that, and there is nothing wrong with it. More importantly, the problem was Ivarage. Dino seemed concerned about the possibility of Veldanava's revival, but the bigger problem was the possibility that Ivarage had absorbed the holy relics. If there was even a possibility that he had gained the power of the Creator, there was a risk that he would have become an entity that could not be controlled. If that were to happen, there would be no time to reconstruct the world. But Feldway laughed and said, "Who cares? If Veldanava does not revive, then everything will be meaningless." He was trying to destroy the world because he thought that Veldanava would be resurrected and stop Feldway. Veldanava would never forgive Feldway for using Milim as well. Even if the world were to be destroyed, Veldanava would be able to regenerate it. From nothing. So don't worry about anything, just start again from the beginning. Therefore, the worst possible outcome for Feldway would be for Veldanava not to be revived. Somewhere in his heart, he had accepted that this would be the most empty and hopeless future. Although he was defeated by Diablo, Feldway boasts unparalleled strength. Feldway was like that, but suddenly he felt a chill. Dino has a keen sense. If Dino is that anxious, what if even this situation was according to Veldanava-sama's plan? It was foolish humanity that killed Veldanava. That's why Feldway believes they should accept the fact that they were abandoned because they were unable to prevent it. That is why humanity should not complain even if they are purged. If it helps with Veldanava's revival, they should rejoice. Just as Michael thought so, Feldway felt the same way. However, if stopping the destruction of the world was not Veldanava's intention, then all of his actions would have been meaningless. This was a belated realization that Feldway, who had never considered the will of his lord, had finally come to. What are Veldanava-sama's true intentions? The muttering was louder than expected and echoed throughout the heavens. Stars, palaces, and heavens. There was no one here who could answer that question. Chapter 1, Flowing Tears. Ruminas surveyed the battlefield. The survival of humanity depended on the outcome of this battle. If they lose, it's over, which is why they are prepared to give it their all. Even if you lose all your limbs and your magical powers are completely depleted, don't be afraid. Instead, consider yourself fortunate to be able to find value in that. Life. Ruminas then used telepathy transmission to encourage all the warriors. It is both sophistry and brainwashing. However, it was also true. In normal times, many would have ignored her words, but here everyone was inspired. This very fact was proof that Rumina's words contained power, justice. Everyone seeks value in their own lives. If there was a just cause that could give it to him, he could move forward without fear of death. And so the battlefield was enveloped in a mysterious heat, and tension grew. In the north, Louis, Gunter, Adalman, Gadra, and others were fighting hard against the Habitaki, a bird that soars through dimensions. They were such a troublesome opponent that it was a stroke of luck that we weren't wiped out on our first try, but thanks to my joining the fight, we were able to see a way to counterattack. To the west, Shin and the others were fighting against the beast that was sprinting through the void. Kakashi, Sale, and Gregory, who had been on the run, were also doing their utmost despite complaining. Sale in particular was also simultaneously maintaining the holy field. He was fully aware that if he fell it would be the end, so he seemed to be under unimaginable pressure. The giants, who were Rumina's natural enemies, the giant chain god bound Core, were now reliable allies. There were also other renowned warriors, and it seemed that they were slowly whittling away the enemy forces. To the south, Ultima was unrivaled against the interstellar fish swim. As expected, even Ruminas exclaimed in admiration. To put it bluntly, the other fighting forces were nothing more than a bonus. Still, they showed cooperation and steadily slaughtered the strange cryptids that continued to emerge so as not to get in Ultima's way. That in itself was a very important job. Furthermore, reinforcements led by Benimaru arrived. As the evil godlike monsters from another world were slaughtered one after the other, it seemed that the situation had turned around. And yet, on the eastern side, there was no movement from Ivarage, the destruction. Death World Dragon Ryu. It's eerily quiet. Rumina's super intuition had been warning her to the maximum extent from the very beginning. But now, I could no longer hear anything. Perhaps the time for vigilance is over. Ruminas had correctly understood the situation. All sound had disappeared from the battlefield. The mysterious silence is broken by evil laughter. Kai-he-he-ha-ha-ha. It was evil, yet so innocent. Is essential evil really this terrifying? Ruminous murmur spoke for everyone else. I'm not arguing whether the destruction death world dragon Iverage, itself is good or evil. The problem is simply that its actions are completely lacking in consideration for others. Without any malice, they pursue only their own curiosity pleasure. This is an act that is incompatible with harmony. Although he was an individual, he was almost complete and was unaffected by what happened to others. That was the terrifying thing about Iverage, the destruction world dragon destruction. Not only this planet, but even the world itself. It seems he has no need for it. If they cannot attract Ivalade's interest, then all negotiations are meaningless. And if her goal is the destruction of the world, then even the actions of Luminous and the others who are trying to stop her will only please Ivalage, the destruction. World Dragon Ryu. There are probably few beings that are more suited to the phrase enemy that must be destroyed. And now, there was a change in the enemy's presence. That's hilarious. If that's the case, I wish he'd acted like a big shot until the very end and not move a single step. The balance of the battlefield had been maintained by Rumina's resurrection. Using holy magic and the absence of Iverage, the destruction death world. Wave Dragon Ryu. If that were to be disrupted, it would not be surprising if the front lines collapsed. This would require a review of tactics, but there was no time for that. There was no strength left anywhere that would allow them to recover from the losses at this strategic stage. However, since the strategy itself was the best, we have no choice but to accept this result. King Gazelle approached next to Ruminez. Demon Lord Ruminez, what will you do? Should we send all of our guerrilla forces at Ivalage? When asked that question, Ruminez groaned and said, If they took that approach, they would be unable to rebuild if one of the front lines collapsed. However, if things continued as they were, it seemed inevitable that the East would collapse. However, the situation does not wait. Worse yet, it came to fruition at a fatal time. Wait, you mean Ivalade's appearance has changed? That appearance. Just as Ruminez had pointed out, Ivalade's appearance had changed. There's no point in worrying about whether your strength has increased or not. Even when it first appeared, it was impossible to grasp its true potential. Then, Ivalage descends to the earth. And then, his appearance was. She looks like a beautiful woman. Do you know who she is? Gazelle asked Ruminez. Ruminez didn't answer. She was a woman I didn't know, but she looked somehow familiar. That's right. It was as if the demon Lord Milim had grown up. And on the ground, Masayuki was the first to react. No. It's not Masayuki himself, but the memories of the hero that sleep within him. Lucia. Masayuki couldn't help but shout out loud, much to his surprise. Who is Lucia? As soon as I thought that, forgotten memories came back to me. It was the name of someone who was his younger sister a long time ago. I see, I'm sure he'd be surprised and scream, but that wasn't him, right? The Lucia before him was the transformed form of the enemy. It seems like this is becoming quite a troublesome situation. Even Masayuki had a serious look on his face. And the situation becomes even more confusing. At the same time that Ivalage took on the form of Lucia, her 3 servants also completed their transformations. Has it really evolved, or is everyone just having a nightmare? Even Velgrind couldn't accurately decipher the upper limit of the power of those 3. It was no wonder that everyone thought it was unrealistic. That wasn't the only abnormality. Jahil's corpse, which had been left on the ground, had begun to move strangely. And finally, a mysterious presence that no one noticed was watching the chaotic battlefield. From far above, Hee hee, my wife has come back to life. My daughter will be arriving soon. My family will be complete. I won't fail next time. I must be careful with my selection and only keep those who are worthy. That someone muttered. It was a cruel declaration. No one on Earth knew about this yet. Emma, Guy, and then there's Carrara and Rain. These three people faced Velzard with Testaross's support. Guy is the main attacker, while Carrara and Rain are the scouts. Velzard's rampage was truly a natural disaster. Velzard's true nature was revealed. It transformed into its strongest dragon form and rampaged wildly, dominating its surroundings. And yet, it was a beautiful sight. Its scales are deeper than white pearls and resemble jewels that captivate anyone who sees them. Those serene deep-sea color, blue diamond, eyes now shine with gold, yellow, as their true power is released. The spirit that leaks out is fierce. It emitted a brilliant, pure white glow, overwhelming the surrounding area with the majesty of an absolute ruler. Even though it is out of control, it is filled with a mysticism that captivates everyone. This was the true form of the undoubtedly strongest dragon species, the white ice dragon. But still, there was no trace of fear on the faces of those facing this violence. This was because the good news of Rimuru's return had been shared through Testarossa. Guy was the first to react. I see. If that bastard comes back, tell him to come over here and help me. Even without you telling me, Rimuru-sama has his own ideas. We must bring Milim-sama back to her senses first, Testarossa replied. No matter which battlefield you look at, it's a very close call. Testarossa couldn't have asked them to prioritize themselves. Exactly, there is no mistake in my lord's judgment. Carrara, who was concentrating on the attack, agreed with Testarossa. She had no idea why Rimuru had gone missing, so she placed her absolute trust in him. However, Carrara was aware of the situation here, even after being turned into an ice statue. Her consciousness remained fixed on the battlefield. Therefore, he was able to aim and fire the god-destroying bullet judgment. Carrara was a follower of Rimuru as usual, but here there was another person defending Rimuru. Guy-sama, we must not be impatient. If we can just buy some time, Rimuru-sama will surely arrive soon, so shouldn't we just focus on Velzard-sama to a certain extent so as not to get hurt? It's a suggestion that is typical of Rain, as you can almost hear the voiceover saying, come help me. The idea of making profits without overdoing it is obvious, and yet there is some truth to it, which is troubling. Besides, the evacuation will be completed soon, and once that happens, Mizari will be able to join in the battle, and Moss and Esprit too. Rain said nonchalantly. He even counted Testarossa and Carrara's subordinates, as if they were his own subordinates. He's as good as ever, Guy thought, amazed but also impressed. If Velzard was in a rational state, there would be no point in adding a half-hearted force. However, now that she was out of control, it was a different story. If you are a capable person, it is possible to avoid being hit by Velzard's attacks. As long as you don't let your guard down, you won't die, so it is useful for the convoke, disturb, disorder, ran tactics. However, I was worried about whether it was really necessary to push myself that hard. Guy wanted to quickly bring Velzard back to her senses. However, his wish would not come true if he simply continued to attack. The first premise was that it was unknown what was going on inside Velzard. Unless they knew this, it was impossible to influence her from the outside. He knew the risks involved, but he needed to detach his astral body and dive into Velzard's inner self, allowing his heart to pass through, but if he did so in his current state, there was a high chance that his defenseless main body would be destroyed. It wasn't that Guy didn't trust Testarossa and the others, but he was well aware of how dangerous Velzard was. As Rain said, one option would be to keep things as they are, but... Guy, I wonder if you can bring Velzard-sama back to her senses. Testarossa asked, while demonstrating her divine skill of using nothingness to counteract the fierce attack of the sanctified Velzard. Yeah, I can do that, but it's not possible while fighting like this. That was Guy's honest and true feelings. Hearing Guy's reply, Testarossa thought that was probably true, just like her. Guy was also using nothingness to deal with Velzard. It was frustrating that he had been able to copy the technique just by watching. But in this situation, he was also reliable. If Guy said it was impossible, there was no room for doubting his words. In the first place, even Testarossa had her hands full just controlling nothingness. At the same time, intervening in Velzard's rampage would have been nothing but a suicidal act for Testarossa. I guess it would be best to ask Rimuru-sama for help after all. Testarossa found it dishonorable that she had to rely solely on Rimuru, and even more than that, it was infuriating to her to no end that Rain, who seemed to have no idea what he was saying, thought that it was the best thing to do. I felt like sighing, but the sense of despair and uncertainty about the future had disappeared. Realizing this fact, Testarossa gave a wry smile. Let's wait for Rimuru-sama. Is that the only option?